Good afternoon. Hi, everybody.
Commissioner Kennedy, are you ready when you
Yes. I,
saw that you were bombarded with people when you walked in?
just doing the people's work and engaging with our constituents and our residents who very much appropriately care about their neighborhoods and want answers and want to hold us accountable. So I'm supportive of that. So it was great to talk to Miss Audrey when I walked in. It was awesome. All right, we're good to go. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alice Kennedy. I'm Housing Commissioner for the Baltimore City Department of Housing Community Development. It's a pleasure to be here. This afternoon, I just want to take a quick moment and recognize staff that we have with us today. We have our Chief of Staff, Scott Davis, our Chief Operating Officer, Theo Ngongeng, Deputy Commissioner Jason Hessler, Chief of Strategic Communications, Tammy Hawley, Executive Advisor to the Commissioner, Stacy Freed, and Assistant Commissioner for Project Finance, Lori Glass is also with us, as well as Jason Wright, who's our new legislative liaison, reporting up to now our Director of Legislative Affairs, Stephanie Murdoch. So we have a team of people with us today that can help answer any questions that I might not be able to answer, or you might see me pass off the mic to some of the staff as we go through this. So I just want to start off by thanking oh, and Brian is here as well. He is the one sitting in the front row with our own video equipment, taking kind of some video of this. He's on our communications team and our public information officer, our PIO.
This is exciting information.
And Tamara Woods is with us as well. You see, I'm just already failing on my own staff. Tamara Woods, who is Assistant Commissioner in our Development Division. Yeah, you remember Tamara. Yeah, you know.
Trying to get over that one.
I know. Unfortunately, Kate Edwards can't be with us either today. You know, to join Theo and Tamara and myself.
Dhcd gets nothing. Nothing.
And myself as part of this presentation today. You know, we should all say it's been a pleasure, you know, working with you over the last years, almost, I think collectively, we're over 20 years easily with the planning department. So definitely that brings me to the statement that I want to thank by thanking the planning department and the planning commission for your continued partnership over the years on both our capital improvement plan, our CIP budget, the work right now that the planning department is doing with the city's comprehensive plan. We're undertaking a comprehensive housing plan this next year. Actually, I think our consultant agreement's finally getting to the Board of Estimates at some point, which will mesh nicely with the city's comp plan. And just want to recognize overall the Planning Commission, Planning Department, overall support for the work that we do and the partnership in it, because it's not just the money, but from an operations standpoint, the Planning Department is a key partner in our impact investment areas, our vacancy reduction strategy, and overall everything that we do when it comes to the work of tackling vacants as well as increasing housing opportunities, affordable housing opportunities in Baltimore. So as you know and might know, our capital needs for affordable housing and community development continue to be higher. It is not something that miraculously has gotten cheaper over the years. When you look at inflation as well as project costs and just where we are, it is expensive. It's expensive work. And, you know, we have within this budget, we've put forth and worked to prioritize and target the funding requests in a way that meets not only the most urgent needs, it leverages other resources, leverages available resources, and really strives to embody our equity principles and so forth. So we can go to the next slide. I'm going to cover items across some of the background, our requests, priority projects, conclusion. This agenda is, I think, the standard agenda that Kristen and Sarah ask us to do, which we follow directions as closely as we can. And we'll go into background now on the next slide, which will cover our just overview of the agency budget, where we are in terms of an over $87 million operating budget. Our vision, mission, values on the left-hand side, and currently we are standing at 343 employees, and we're actually actively filling positions. So in the next couple of months, that's probably going to get up to 363. I think we have 20-ish positions in open recruiting right now. So we're continuing to grow.
People that started on Monday since we told that number last
Yep.
week.
So that we're even up higher.
And only 3 of them are from planning.
Yeah. No, that's good. We can let the planning department know when we post
When you coach.
when we post or poach. Well, I could go into that more. We are thinking about some planning positions so that we don't poach, and we actually are supporting the planning department in the work that we do. Next slide is our organization chart. Just, it's hard to see on the screen, but just to give you an idea of how the agency is kind of filled out. In the last year, Dr. Marvin Bly filled our chief fiscal officer position. Theo has come on board as our chief operating officer. And just as a reminder, we have 5 operational divisions, and then our HR team, our fiscal team, strategic communications team, and the team of policy and research as well. Our next slide goes over some agency assets. For us, this is a little bit different. So some of our assets include the 8,212 buildings and lots that are on the across and scattered across the city. We also have 3 city-owned buildings that are assigned to us that provide community resources, and then we consider CodeMap as a technology asset. On the right-hand side, you can also see around technology is our enterprise technology system. This upgrade is actually happening with ARPA dollars and encompasses our it encompasses permits and our code enforcement CHIP software, which all works together so that it is going to be streamlining our permitting system through that work. Also on here, you have our Gilmore Street properties, which are kind of combined. They're 2 different addresses, but essentially one building, which is why we said 3. Dawson Center, which we're going to be funding with some CDBG funds, and then the Oliver Center, which that assessment was completed in November, and we're actively working with DGS and Rec and Parks on what the next visioning process will look like for Oliver. And once that visioning process is completed, and there's a conceptual plan, then it'll be a matter of figuring out where and what dollars would be in kind of the next CIP budgets down the road.
Don't mean to interrupt you, but there was a resident who, obviously who was here before from BCRP. In order to save her our presentation on Oliver, the assessment's done. You're talking with DGS and BCRP in terms of what's going on. Is there going to be a community engagement process?
Yes.
Okay.
BCRP is going to be taking the lead on the community engagement process. We went over, and I think Ms. Audrey knows the timeline for that. It'll take about a year to complete because they're going to engage one of their existing on-call entity groups. They need to go through that process, develop out a scope of work for the engagement process, and then it'll have that kind of conceptual vision planning work with the community. And that process will take about 12 months per Director Moore and his team. And then that will kind of inform what the next iteration of Oliver looks like. And really wanting to support Oliver having, and we've been very public in this and wanting to support Oliver having 21st century, amenities and not just amenities, but what are standard, I call this a lot, standard level of care, but 21st century facilities that, serve everybody in the community, whether or not it's the People's Association and Miss Audrey, who do a significant amount of work with youth in the community, and kind of offer seniors opportunities as well to what the recreation and kind of what does the community think and what do they see as the future, and is the current space what should be the current space, or should it be something different or formulated different, or whatever that may be.
Thank you very much for that sidebar. I hope that addresses your questions. Okay.
Please, I'm sorry.
I would have,
No, I just wanted to.
but thank you.
Yeah, I want her.
Yeah, and Ms. Morales, I heard the question, and I can give you a call after that. There is no really transition to Madison. I don't have an answer for that. Like, that isn't part of this piece, because that's a maybe. That isn't that isn't an
No,
absolute.
sir, I'm sorry, there's no discussion. Let's
Yep.
go ahead, go back to your presentation.
So we can go on to the next slide now, which will start looking at some of our recently completed projects that we've been able to execute thanks to the CIP funding that we've had. So the first one is Somerset. This is part of the Perkins Somerset Old Town Transformation Plan. This is the Ruby. I think as everybody here knows, Perkins Somerset Old Town is being led by the Housing Authority of Baltimore City and their developers. We play a supporting partnership role as it relates to the Choice Neighborhoods Grant, as well as providing critical funding, especially for infrastructure needs, as well as on the housing side, some of the needs that are have been in terms of housing gaps, et cetera. So it's exciting that the Ruby is open and they're in the process right now of leasing up. We can go to the next slide, which is our Housing Repair Assistant Program. This covers both general obligation bonds as well as CDBG funds, and also looks at funding out of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. There's support from the trust fund in here, the deferred loan program, emergency roof repair, et cetera. The other piece of this is that these funds leverage other funds. These leverage our outside partners as part of housing upgrades to benefit seniors that come in, which is also another CIP project of ours. It leverages our weatherization funding, and it also leverages our lead hazard reduction funding. Next slide. 1313 Druid Hill. This is an exciting one. Many of you on the commission, I think, were part of this when it came before you all for our work on stabilization. We also have this as a historic property. We're excited too. We're going to be partnering to put together something that we've never done before, which is a historic tax credit kind of investment package that we're going to put together a little bit before we put it out for RFP, so that we already have some information that could help guide the developer on how to best use those tax credits, and kind of thinking through what that would look like, and might even include some crowdfunding associated with it as well. So we're really excited about how we've been able to stabilize this property, preserve this property, and it's critical to the fabric of the community. And it's an example of making sure and working hard to have the funding available so that we don't end up with demolition by neglect or other things that can happen at a property. So this is a great one that we like to highlight, and the work was completed this month. Next slide. Our Community Catalyst Grant Program supports many different organizations doing capital work around the reduction of vacancy and the revitalization and rehabilitation of vacant properties. We highlighted here Black Woman Build, who's done a significant number of work across over in West Baltimore, and I think a number of you are familiar with Black Women Build, but they're a homeownership and wealth building initiative that trains Black women in trades-related skills by restoring vacant and deteriorated homes. So we're really pleased that the Community Catalyst program funded by the CIP was able to support their projects on Division and other areas as well. Next slide. Same thing here, slightly differently. So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, one of the line items in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund budget supports our community land trusts across Baltimore City, which we've done a great job, thanks to the team over the last 4 years of really getting a strong and robust support network for community land trusts across the city up and running. We have a consultant in Grounded Solutions that's helped us do that. And this is an example of Knee-High and their work on kind of round 2 that's going to have a significant number of properties associated with this. They have multiple funding sources that they're using, and it's going to be used to construct and renovate the affordable housing for households at 50% and below AMI, and ensuring also affordability for additional owners. Next slide. Now moving to some projects that are under construction. These are some fun ones. We start with Uplands. Uplands is a project that has been around for decades at this point. And we are extremely pleased. Not only were we able to complete the groundbreaking, but they are actively working on the site. The photograph is actually from a drone photo that we got, is it 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, in terms of the progress that they've made over time. It's one of the city's largest redevelopment initiatives that's been underway for multiple decades. It's a former apartment site. It was more than 900 dilapidated units at one point. It's approximately 60 acres, and it's being redeveloped in 2 phases. And this second phase consists of 150 mixed income rental units, of which 141 are affordable. They're under construction, anticipated to be complete in 2025. Next slide. Another one that is currently underway is still Perkins Somerset Old Town. Since last year, we were here last year, we've seen considerable progress in the footprint. Somerset 1 is fully occupied. Somerset 2 and 3, of which you saw the Ruby is one of those, is leasing right now. The development team with Henson and Mission First, as many of you might have seen in the news, were able to secure Lidl as a grocery store tenant for Somerset 4, so that's exciting. That will be coming. And then Perkins Phase 1 is almost complete. They're actively working on phases 2 and 3, and then phases 4 and 5 are anticipated to be under construction by the end of 2024. So there's a lot happening. If you haven't driven through that site recently or up over in there, I highly recommend going to check it out. Just as a side note, we also are actively working with MSA. You'll start to see that Lombard Middle School and Elementary School should be down by December, January-ish of this year, beginning of next year, working with MSA on that demolition, and then we'll be constructing a brand new school, and City Schools is leading that effort to do the construction of the new school on that site. So lots happening, and you'll see a little bit further on in the slide presentation that we have kind of 2 areas in the CIP budget that we support this project with. Next slide. NHP Phase 1, we had our groundbreaking for this project. This is also very exciting to get underway. We have received in the past some CIP funding for infrastructure design. This is the first phase of the 17 acres major redevelopment area in Park Heights. And it fronts the even side of 4700 block of Park Heights Avenue. We had our groundbreaking on the first 100-unit senior rental building that's now under construction. And the next is another 50-unit multifamily building and about 17 homeownership units that will be part of the next phase of that. Another project that is our GEDCO work with Ascension. It's funding is used to create 20 new affordable rental housing units for households earning no more than 50% of AMI, and this also came out of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And then we finished up on this section with Bakersview, which is exciting over in Druid Heights. It's led by the Druid Heights Community Development Corporation. It's a multi-phase homeownership project. This phase includes the construction of the 8 new units in the 2300 block of Division, and the sales prices are at about $185,000, and household income cannot exceed 120% AMI. So finally, I'd like to run through, it's going to take us a little bit. There's a number of these projects. I'd like to run through our fiscal year 25 budget requests. As I stated earlier, the need has not shrunk across the city. The need is great, and we continue to do this work and prioritize it in a number of ways in terms of how we prioritize. So we have a strong commitment to the housing needs, and we have a strong vision concerning the housing needs of the city, and we do our best to be as strategic as possible, knowing that there historically have been limited capital resources, and how can we make the biggest impact with the smallest some of the smallest level of resources that we have, or limited a number of resources. So we align with the mayor's pillars. We ensure that we're equitably investing in disinvested communities, disinvested communities that have had high concentrations of vacants. We continue to focus on the creation and preservation of affordable housing, which is extremely important. And then also making sure that we're doing strategic investments where we also are leveraging resources, and whether or not those resources are financial in nature or people in nature, but we want to be making sure that we're also leveraging as much as possible throughout here. So, example of that is just how we've been able to know that we need to kind of leverage different components of all of our projects, with whether or not it's state, federal, or other nonprofit money, LIHTC, et cetera. So next slide will kind of show, we've lumped this, maybe I don't know how the other agencies kind of address this, but really what you're going to see on the next three slides in terms of high priority projects, we combine these in kind of a grouping. So the first two of these summary slides really are projects that support the mayor's, comprehensive vacancy reduction strategy. They support our work as outlined in the community, the framework for community development. They support the work in the impact investment areas, and they're, critical to kind of moving this work along. So there are 15 projects in total that support kind of that vacancy reduction work. And then on the third slide of this, so the next slide, we get to the high priority projects that are high priority because they are large scale, and such as the Perkins Somerset Old Town development, which in the CIP budget kind of falls under this project title of Southeast Baltimore redevelopment, or Southeast Baltimore affordable housing. That is absolutely a priority because of the timeline that we are on with the Choice Neighborhoods grant in partnership with HUD. So we need to get these units completed and constructed by the housing deadline as set forth in that grant agreement. Another high priority project for us, which is a new one, which I'll talk a little bit more when I get to it on slide 41, is our infrastructure assessment work, which we think is critical. So we're starting out with our impact investment areas. I think everyone here is familiar with the areas. These are outlined in the framework for community development. These are areas that we've actively been working on in terms of our impact investment area, work group meetings, working with the community, doing our block level planning, knowing each block in terms of zones, zone 1s through 5s, what needs to be demolished, what needs to be stabilized, what needs a homeowner repair, and how does that play out. We also do this work with other communities as well. And this also aligns and kind of runs up through the neighborhood sub-cabinet format that we have with the mayor's office. So we do quarterly sub-cabinet meetings, and we have monthly work group meetings with communities making these decisions. Next slide. Next one is the Gompers building. If anybody is familiar with 1701 East North Avenue, it is a huge building. It is, historically significant building. And we have put this out for RFP before. We've gotten some pretty ambitious responses, but not as great in terms of having a capital stack with them. The community is very much interested in really kind of drilling down in terms of what could go here. There's also some HUD restrictions in terms of some of the uses on it. So, and just by looking at the building as well, we know that pretty much, we're looking at needing $60 million. This slide says 50. I'm tacking on that extra 10. It really needs about $60 million of investment to get something. So we really want to start with this to be able to have some money as part of the feasibility study, some money as part of a developer incentive, or really what's needed to kind of jumpstart getting this building moving. Next slide. Next is 2200 block of Druid Hill. This is directly across from the site assembly that's happening for Cab Callaway Legends Square Park, which is currently under development. And it's also around the corner from the Baker's View construction, so it all ties together. There is method. It is not just madness. There is method, and there is a concrete, actual data-driven approach, community-led data-driven approach to how this plays out and how the investments occur. So on this one, it is a significant number of the entire block. Druid Heights actually just entered into an agreement with a co-developer on these, so they're kind of getting ready to roll, but they will need significant subsidy per property in order to achieve the outcomes and achieve homeownership outcomes. Next slide is Coldstream Homestead Montebello. This covers acquisition and demolition, specifically looking at Abbottson and Carswell, possibly Gorsuch for not demolition and acquisition, but Gorsuch actually for the renovation of properties and some developer incentives that are needed there. And these are critical to the work in the Coldstream Homestead of Montebello and tie in across the Alameda with the Tivoli project. On the next slide, we have Upton funding. This is to cover specific demolition in Upton that's needed as part of a site assembly that we've been working on with the community for a number of years to then have a larger site assembly for an RFP project. We can move on to the 800 blocks of Harlem and Edmondson, which are also in Upton. This is an excellent project. If you haven't been over there yet to take a look at it, it is amazing to see that 800 block of Harlem and how it's changed in the last 2 years. And we've had some increased construction costs, and we have also had an increase in some infrastructure costs that have come up around an alley and moving some light poles and conduit and also some water service that has come into play, hence why the infrastructure planning piece that we'll get to in a little bit is extremely important as part of this project. Poppleton is just a minor amount of money that's still left that is needed to finish out some acquisition around some lots, specifically a parking lot that's associated with a building there, and some of the other consolidation pieces in Poppleton. So I just want to be very clear that while this says acquisition, demolition, and relocation, there is no relocation of a human associated with Poppleton in this budget. If anything, it's actually relocation of a parking lot that we would be required to do under guidelines as associated with trying to move some lots around for creating the opportunity to actually have some new homeownership and homeowner units on that building. Next is our housing repair assistance programs. You know, this is a significant part when we talk about vacancy prevention. This is also a significant part when the CIP, when you see the CIP coming in, not just to support the physical, you know, I know the CIP is geared to the physical, but I think it's important to recognize the impact that the CIP budget has on humans. And our housing repair assistance programs not only prevent vacancy, but they really also support the creation and sustaining of generational wealth for families across the city. And that is extremely important, and I think it's worth recognizing as part of this work. Next, we go on to our normal emergency demolition and stabilization. We broke this out a little bit differently this year because we do have an ability to do some of this with CDBG, but in order to do so, we needed to create a very specific project so that we made sure that any of those CDBG funds were wholly separate in their own world, because in order to do emergency, there's some also HUD guidelines that don't apply, with the emergency component of this work. So these really are those emergency situations that we have to go out. So that's why we have this separated out as a project. And then the next project would be kind of the normal demolition and stabilization, where we're demolishing properties or going in and doing stabilization of properties. And reminder, we can do that work on properties that the city does not own. So that's very important as well. Housing upgrades to benefit seniors, like I said before, we have a significant number of seniors actually across the city. There are over 75,000 older adults in the city of Baltimore over the age of 65, around 57,000 households contain at least one adult over the age of 65. And we know that older adults are more likely to live on fixed income. And also we want to support them being able to age in place, and also on the social side of the work, like I said before, protect their investments in their homes, as well as be able to have some, the generational wealth and asset to move along. It's also important from a preservation standpoint, because we've seen significantly without that support of deferred maintenance and repairs, that property becomes extremely high risk of becoming vacant and impacting the rest of the block where we are actively working on vacants. So it is all part of that fabric of having a comprehensive and holistic approach to tackling vacant properties in the city. The homeowner incentive programs are also important because we live in a country and a city, a country, a city, and a state where savings just aren't there for a lot of people. So we have people that are, sometimes maybe working 2-3 jobs across a household and still necessarily aren't able to pull together everything that's needed to purchase a house, but they want to, and they have the funding. We also have people that are more mid-income that still also don't have some of the savings needed to get over that pipeline. So we want to make sure that we're supporting homeowner incentives, which are also critical as we tackle vacant properties, making sure that we have varying levels of affordability and creating very vibrant and thriving communities across the city of Baltimore. Next, our Community Catalyst Grant Program. Oh, lead hazard reduction switched over. I missed that. This is actually in the CIP. The funding here actually matches, and it's a required match to our federal HUD lead hazard reduction grant. And this is critical as we tackle the public health issue of lead paint poisoning prevention among our children and youth. Next slide. Community Catalyst Grant Programs. We showed you some of the examples earlier of Black Women Build, providing the necessary capital to get some of these private, to match and utilize some of the money that's being raised, and leveraging other money to move some of these projects forward to be able to support equitable development. And just a reminder too, that these are scored from the standpoint of also having an emerging organization category from an equity standpoint as well. And then we come over to Baltimore Shines low-income solar program. This is actually this is a roof on Fulton Avenue that we did a couple years ago. And we're leveraging this with both CDBG funding and right now also ARPA funding. And it really helps kind of support some of the investments that we have and are able to make in our communities to create thriving, vibrant, sustainable communities and reduce costs overall from a capital standpoint. Next the last two slides are tied to, these next two slides are all tied to the PSO and the need to kind of continue that funding so we can meet the goals set forth. We have the affordable housing component as well. This was fun on the demo day over at Perkins. This might be the one the mayor was enjoying kind of knocking down some of these buildings that day as well. And then we round out with a new project, which is our infrastructure analysis and assessment. This is one that we've actually looked at for a number of years, and it just, unfortunately, where we were with our CIP cap, we weren't able to get it in, but we think it's extremely important. And in my conclusion, you'll see that we have a very big number associated with a $3 billion number around the reduction of vacant properties and not just vacant properties and buildings, but vacant lots. And a key component to that work and what we've learned over the years is the need for some of that infrastructure analysis. So this would be in partnership with Matt Garbark's team and looking at like how we can best do some of this infrastructure up front, because sometimes we're not finding out about it until it's too late almost, or the money's there, or it's going to create a gap where there's no money to fill that gap, and then that project's just sitting there and not able to move forward. And that's everything from multifamily to single-family redevelopment. I mean, that's one of the reasons why 800 block of Harlem and Edmondson, on the Edmondson side, it's just been kind of sitting there because we've been trying to figure out how to handle this alley situation, and widening the alley so that we could have some parking in the back when you're talking about properties that we're looking at, $325,000 sales price to have rear parking, also alley widening to make sure you can fit garbage trucks and every other thing, moving light poles, et cetera. So we're really excited about this, and looking, this will enable us to work with our partners to do those assessments, and as part of our internal due diligence. So in conclusion, I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes here before we go into any questions to talk about the mayor's announced historic $3 billion in vacants across the city. We're determined, and Mayor Scott is determined to be the mayor that is comprehensively tackling vacants once and for all. I'm proud to have worked alongside my colleagues at Dhcd, as well as the finance department and Director Moxton and the mayor's office in developing this strategy, which really builds off of the work that we've already been doing. It's also, the vacancy reductions plan is the single largest policy issue that will be facing our agency for the next 15 years. It's already been facing our agency, and we are actively working to tackle it. So on this slide right now, you can see this is just a reminder of the work that we do with communities. This is Broadway East, looking at asset mapping, our market conditions, and then getting into our block level planning. Taking that further, we've created zones within the communities. We have areas that the community wants to start. We know how many properties are associated with each of these zones. We can tell you how many are, and the specific addresses that are tied to demolition, what's tied to stabilization, how many are we estimating that will need home repair assistance, how many are we estimating that might need down payment and closing cost assistance, where do we have opportunities to support live-work opportunities in some commercial corridors of vacant properties for entrepreneurial opportunities for people to purchase, renovate, live in the second floor, have their business on the first floor, and start to realize the positive financial benefits of that work. Acquisition is also a big component to this work, so we also know what properties do we need to target for acquisition. So on the next slide, you'll see that we have taken all of that data from the block level planning efforts, specifically in our zone ones, and then extrapolating that out in a pretty cool spreadsheet that ends up being able to put cost factors associated with this, timelines, kind of the anticipated percent of properties that would fall into some of the categories here around developer incentives or home buyer, home repair, like I said. The infrastructure is a big piece of this. I want to just let everybody know that the infrastructure here is not just roads and pipes. The infrastructure here also captures things like trees, tree pits, sidewalks, ADA compliant corners, alleyways, some parks, some recreation components, some green space maintenance, lot maintenance in here. It's essentially looking at things where, some say they're amenities, but we really say these are standard level of care that communities should have. And as we're renovating vacant properties, we need to make sure that there are streetlights. Though some of these blocks that have been vacant for over 10 years or 15 years, they don't have streetlights anymore. The sidewalks are a mess. They don't have corners. They don't have crosswalks, and they're unsafe, and they're just not, inducive to being a vibrant and thriving neighborhood again, like they once were. So the infrastructure number is large, but it encompasses a wide range of things. So I wanted everybody to kind of understand that from the get-go. So while we know that this work has a large price tag, we have been working with PFM, and they published a white paper, which we have, I think, linked in the presentation, as well as can provide a link to all the commission members. But PFM's initial analysis shows that the return on investment is there. So the initial capital stack here, this is a large number. It's a $3 billion number. The mayor has made the commitment of city commitment of $300 million utilizing a non-contiguous TIF as well as the Industrial Development Authority. And then the state has a role, which if you look at the state budget, capital budget, they have included $50 million in core, which is an increase, as well as an increase in Bernie, as well as an increase in rental housing works, all of which supports this program. And there's accompanying legislation at the state level as well, outside of the budget, that would allow Project Core to also be used for debt service. So that $50 million could be used to bring more money to the front so that there's a larger chunk. Because if we keep investing at the level that we've been investing at over the years in terms of how much is really kind of immediately tackling some of this work, it would take us upwards of 300 years to tackle the vacants in the city of Baltimore, both vacant properties and vacant lots. And we all know that I don't think any of us wants to wait over, close to 300 years. We've already, I think, waited too long. And, the impacts of racist housing policies across the city and the disinvestment in our neighborhoods have shown that the time is now. There is no more that we can push this down the road or not address it. And that's why Mayor Scott has really pulled together the team to pull this together and get that capital stack there because of the level of importance this is, not just for our city, but it's also important for the state. Also in the capital stack, it does include as well philanthropic and business support as part of this. We've already had initial conversations. We have some soft commitments. One of the soft commitments is $25 million of investment in vacant property reduction. So, progress is being made and we're working there. So on the next slide, you'll see that while it's a big number, and if you go and look at the short white paper, and PFM is actually, they put out the short 5-page white paper. They're actually working on a longer analysis as well. But the return on investment is 100% there. And that was something that myself and Director Moxton were very pleased to see when we were talking about the work and the investment was needed. And this doesn't just cover property tax revenue. Like, this is calculating income tax revenue, property tax, like it is looking at multiple different sources of where that return on investment comes in. So I just want to thank you for our time. The last kind of conclusion slide, we like to show the staff getting together. This is our most recent trainings that we had in December that covered the vacancy reduction strategy. It was inclusive of all staff members across all divisions over the course of 2 days to continue to ensure that everyone at DHCD is in the same boat, rowing in the same direction, and actively participating in this process, whether or not you're a deputy commissioner or a secretary to, or an office support specialist or a code enforcement officer, that everybody knows what their role is in doing this work and making sure that for the purposes of why we are here today, that we actively and smartly invest in our city and execute the plan that we've put forth for you in our fiscal year 25 CIP budget.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. All right, questions, starting off with Commissioner McCoach.
I have none. It's great.
All right, Commissioner
I think just one, and I think I know the answer, but with the vacant property roof stabilization that you highlighted on one slide, if the property is not city-owned, is the owner billed for that?
Yes.
Or fined?
Yes.
If you know who the owner is or have been able to locate them?
So even if we aren't able to locate the owner, we know who the owner of record is, and the lien is placed on that property.
Okay.
Both for demolition and stabilization of properties that we do not own. So we complete due process and serve notice, and then go into the next step, which allows us to just take the action because it is a nuisance property, and then we lien them.
Okay, thank you, and excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Vice Chair Stevenson.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Kennedy. Excellent presentation. You answered most of my questions. I'll just ask about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This is more of a procedural question because, throughout the year, we review Board of Estimates transfers related to expenditures from the trust fund. So my question is, the chunk of money that we see allocated for Affordable Housing Trust Fund in, say, the first year, 25, do we know what we're going to spend that money on yet, or we don't? And how does that process sort of work as we go through the year?
Yeah, so each year, the trust fund actually, in partnership with the trust fund commissioners, the agency creates a spending plan for the trust fund, which started back when we had the first kind of tranche of money coming into the trust fund. And that spending plan covers everything from construction and preservation of new housing units, just straight up rental, which a lot of that money then supports leveraging LIHTC multifamily projects, and it has to be 50% and below AMI. We also have the community land trust as a line item. We have the home repair programs as a line item. So that spending plan is kind of put forth as consideration for the Housing Trust Fund Commission. Sometimes there are spirited debates and conversations about the spending plan, and then we execute that spending plan by putting out notice of funding availability and issuing RFPs, et cetera.
Awesome, thank you. And I guess the reason I'm asking for clarification is because when we look at the budget, there's a big chunk of money for Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and then there's smaller line items that seem like they are similar to the types of things that we use the Affordable Trust Fund for. So my question is, again, procedural. I'm just trying to figure out how we're managing the buckets.
Yeah. I can give a little bit more insight into that. So per the MOU that was executed around the trust fund, over the last several years, the amount of city money into the trust fund has grown. And so now it's capped out at that $7.5 million cap. All of that goes into the trust fund, and then that spending plan happens over in the trust fund world. The trust fund is also limited at 50% AMI, and 50% of the funds also over the course of time have to go to 30% AMI. So we're talking very significantly highly affordable properties. So while some of the other projects like a community catalyst grant program might support the creation of affordable housing unit because they got a community catalyst grant, that affordable unit very well could be at 80%, 60%, 100%. So some of the differences are also in, while it says affordable, what is the definition of affordable? And the trust fund has a very specific definition of affordable.
Got it. Great answer. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Williams.
No questions, just appreciate all the hard work that goes on here. And as a former land use attorney and someone who came across the planning commission often but didn't appreciate all the work that housing does. And so I'm looking forward to working with you and the team to publicize and evangelize all the hard work that goes on here that even led to this presentation being prepared, but all the work that will happen with the money being deployed.
Commissioner Horn.
Great presentation, as always. Just a quick question on the community catalyst grants. Do you have, was there ever sort of evaluation or some type of document which could talk about the impact of that particular program?
We do have some information that we've gathered as part of our annual reports in terms of the types of projects. Actually, we can tell you every single project and grantee that has been awarded. This is one of those things like in all of our development world, and this is sometimes why you might see a capital transfer that comes in a little bit later and why there's a multiple year process. Some of them have been awarded funds on the capital side and they're still kind of finalizing their capital stack for that project or so forth. But we can provide that outline. We can provide that information to the commission. And that's a really good question and something for us to take back to think about just maybe hiring or looking at like a more formal evaluation just from an equity inclusion and really how it's impacted our smaller nonprofit organizations and our emergent organizations as well.
I think it's a great program. And I know you're asking for 9 million, but I was just wondering, what are the requests, the amount of requests that we actually get for that program?
Oh, and I think the 9 million, if I double check on that, that was like the
I mean, for
larger
25.
over time.
Okay.
We typically only end up for the community catalyst grants, like we're in there for this next budget as 1.5 million. So we could easily spend 9 million.
Oh, no, I was
one.
okay, all right.
9 million or 9 billion?
Yeah, I mean, and that's also.
I'm just trying to figure out like what is the real need
Yeah.
in,
The real need.
in terms of the requests that you get and the amount of money that you.
If we look at the slide, if you end up looking at the slide in the presentation that shows our $3 billion strategy, and you look at the developer incentive, I mean, we're looking at $88 million of need, which is pretty much what the Catalyst program is supporting, especially on the pieces that are related to vacant building reduction. We've gotten some from emergent organizations where they're building out their community space or things like that. But when you're looking also at the need around a lot of the developer incentives for the CDCs and also our small emerging nonprofit developers, we lump that need in with the developer incentive world, which is closing that appraisal gap, and that's an $88 million universe.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to get a little bit more information about the Baltimore Shines program because that is, in addition to the work that you do with, the small improvements, the hubs funding that help keep people in their homes and age in place. I'm just curious, has it been difficult to implement those projects? And that's kind of question one. And question two, are you, when you do those identify locations and do those projects, are you also looking at roof repair as a part of that effort?
That is a great question. So we have several partners, of which Civic Works is our lead partner and has been our lead partner for a number of years on Baltimore Shines. They're in the process. They just relaunched their job training component associated with this work, which is a key reason why we keep kind of putting money in and funding it, because it has a really strong economic outcome when it relates to creating really quality jobs for our residents. So in terms of finding people, we don't really tend to have a problem because the way that the program was designed, it was designed to build off of our weatherization program. And, over the last 15 years, I mean, we've had over 10,000 properties weatherized in the city of Baltimore. And some of those properties have already had roof repair done. So when we initially analyzed the list of like 9,000 properties, we went through and first looked at the ones that had already received roof repair. Then we looked at the ones that had received the white roof as part of the repair, and we kind of focused on those first. We do include roof repair as well as electrical upgrade, because that's sometimes we still have a lot of residents that live in Baltimore City that have a fuse box and that are screwing and unscrewing fuses. They have, I don't think I can publicly say the name of the company, but there's a company that is actually a breaker box that has historically been a danger and fire hazard. I've heard it, may begin with an F.
Don't go there.
Yep. But we come across those as well, so we look at that because overall, and if the homeowner also has other needs, like the goal is that they've already been served by weatherization, so we're automatically kind of lowering a base load as best as we can, whether or not it's through electric and in the property. We make sure they have the other kind of appliances. We look at furnace replacement, which would be in there. We're looking at electrification as well. And we're also including that overview as part of like the $3 billion world, right? So we want to support sustainable and resilient renovation and revitalization of our communities. So we're also looking at the developer incentives in that $88 billion universe I just mentioned, also including pieces for electrification, solar readiness. We've already standardized in our home repair programs that everywhere where possible, which is typically every flat roof, unless there's, something major that is there, that our first recommendation is a reflective roof replacement for the resident. Ultimately, it's the resident's choice. If they want to choose something different, they can, but that's what the standardized policy is to lead with.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. I mean, we're looking as a commission at, greenhouse gas studies and the need to make shifts to electrification for a lot of our communities, and obviously the communities that are not as able to make these conversions or changes on their own. I think it's great that it's been folded into the weatherization program. I think for its impact on individual lives, I think that weatherization program has been a lifesaver for many people. And I'm glad that you're looking at the reflective roofs, because that's another aspect of what we're looking at from a sustainability portion and for other aspects of comprehensive plans in the city. So I just wanted to compliment you and your team for those programs. Thank you.
Commissioner Jones.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is an excellent presentation, and there's a lot of things in here that I'm very excited to see happen in Baltimore City. Also going to take a moment to tell you how much I appreciate your team and the work and effort they do, and how much I love working with them. And then lastly, also, Code Maps is one of the best things that I can work with, and I love it, and I just want to let you know that here publicly. The one question I do have is about the impact investment area slide that you have, I believe, 24. And I realize I sat here making assumptions on the total estimated cost of $2 billion, and I realize I can just ask you to walk me through exactly what encompasses the $2 billion estimated cost, and if that is something that encompasses the rest of the projects below, or that is something a little different, and I was hoping you'd give me a little answer on that. Thank you.
So the $2 billion number is included in the slide number 44, which is the $3 billion vacants. And so the $2 billion actually is the number that we're looking at for the first 10 years of the reduction. And then the additional billion that gets us to a $3 billion program comes in at years 11 to 15. And that covers those activities that we've outlined. So demolition, stabilization, acquisition, home buyer down payment incentives, the live near your work, home repair incentives, and infrastructure really make up that $2 billion number. And then we've included also other areas that we're looking at leveraging on the operations side or other capital needs with philanthropic support as well.
Perfect, thank you.
Finally, my only question actually is on this slide is Winata down at the bottom. Is that Winata?
Yeah, it's missing an
MA,
A. Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
I mean, they're $500 million of the $2 billion original assessment. Is any of that, how much of that is going to be funded through the state grant of creating Winata?
We haven't quite figured that part out yet. So we have the state grant that figured, the creation of Winata. We've included in this estimate West North Avenue development, like also on here is Brooklyn, Curtis Bay area, and other areas of focus that encompass areas outside of the impact investment areas that are still extremely important or critical to the city. We know that there is, a portion of the funding for West North Avenue. They can't address all of that just with what they've received to date. The award of $10 million has been fantastic. Chad's doing an amazing job. Director Hayes is doing an amazing job there. But it needs more funding. And when we have a slide, which we didn't include, but we can send it as a follow-up to the commission, that's a heat map And it overlays also with, we have it that overlays with council districts. We also have it that it overlays with the state legislative districts. And just the heat map of concentration of vacants in the footprint that is West North Avenue develop is just significant.
Yeah, I think he said yesterday during a presentation that 60%
It is.
of the homes within the Winona area are vacant. So, I mean, I'm
So
not,
there's going to be additional money. So even it's kind of like our CIP budget. Maybe I could put it this way: like even though we've put forth a $3 billion plan, like the buckets that we're going to be using, they don't all fit, and there's some specific projects. So we're still going to be needing to come to you every year and planning out and leveraging and making this work. And I would say the same thing probably, with West North Avenue. They're going to still have kind of a yearly ask on the things that they're going to be putting forth as developer incentives, et cetera. But we have a lot around acquisition. When you even just look at some of the numbers there that we have to tackle just for acquisition alone, and we are the legal entity that can do the acquisition. So we're doing the acquisition,
for
Winona,
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that's staggering, it's 1/4 of the total $2 billion budget, which I understand and I appreciate it. Winona is new. Chad is great. And I think there's a lot of really positive things that can happen at it. That's something that I would like to see in the next couple of years in the CIP is, okay, what are we allocating towards it? What are we getting out of it? So with that, I'm going to open it up very briefly for community input because we've got to move on to our last presentation. Is there anyone here? Yes, Miss Audrey.
Hello, good afternoon again. And this is
Come on up.
good afternoon. And this is definitely worth the ticket I will probably get on my meter. Thank you, Mr.
Wow.
Kennedy. Thank you for kind of your support and your patience with Oliver and all the things that you do and your staff and Mr. Scott. I had a question on the vacants reduction, and I see you have Broadway East and Johnson Square on there as a part of the development, and Oliver's right in the middle.
Yep.
So how did you get Broadway East?
Can you go back to slide 22? Because those are based on the NIF areas, right?
Yeah, and these are the impact investment areas. Yep.
Yeah, so if, so we have Oliver.
You got to speak into the
Sorry,
microphone.
excuse me. Oh, sorry about that.
There you go.
Yes, we have Oliver in the middle of Johnson Square and Broadway East. So if you're developing them or they're part of your vacancy.
Yeah, you got to go back to the map, John, if you would. I think it's
So
slide
how does Oliver
22.
get developed or?
24.
Or are we not included?
No, you're included. So,
But we are.
not, yep. So Oliver is actually a community that was used as a proof of concept neighborhood to create the impact investment areas and to look at the impact. And so Oliver falls into the areas of focus. So on the slide here where it had other budget line items, Oliver is picked up in our other community area of focus, our other what we call asset building neighborhood. So Oliver is not an official impact investment area that falls within the East impact investment area, but other areas of focus that we have, that we work with, if you were to look on the side, it's Oliver. Darley Park is one that isn't there that we pick up. We also pick up part of Berea that would be to the right side. So kind of those areas, and then the 4x4 is another one when I think about that east side in terms of other areas of focus that are part of this work that are captured in the other mapping, but are not an official impact investment area.
Okay. Let me see, okay. I have a question you have.
Come on, up to the microphone.
Oh, I'm
Yep.
sorry, excuse me.
Bless you.
Another question was about, I know Oliver is not a part of your CIP for 2025 to 2030. Is it an option for Oliver if we try to go after catalyst funds or private funds or things like that to, I guess, do the renovations that we need for our community and our community center? Is that a possibility or are able to do that?
So the Community Catalyst Grant Program is open to nonprofit organizations, but cannot be used on a city-owned building. And
What about private funds?
and the and it also it caps out at like 300,000, 50,000 in there. And already we know, I mean, we need about $16 to $20 million for the Oliver Center is what the estimate is right now. Private money is on the table, and that's something that we would potentially be looking at. So when we make it through the visioning process and the conceptual plan puts forth what a potential budget, because that conceptual plan will end up in a potential budget of whatever ends up being that end result, then we have to figure out how we're building that capital. Then we have to figure out how we're building that capital stack, and that will include potential CIP money, private money, et cetera.
Okay, but it's also okay for the community itself to go after private funds and then let you know what those are, so we can build on that
I
as
think
well?
I would advise that we all work together once
Yes.
we have a conceptual plan, because my experience is on the private funding side, that the private funders want to see the larger vision and have an exact time frame, when is their money coming in, and depending upon what money we use, also impacts how and when any other additional money can come into play.
And who asks the private funders for the money is really, really important. You going up to a private funder as a community advocate and whatnot, you're going to get, you may get X. The city, Commissioner Kennedy going up, she may get X plus Y. It's just the nature of, because you're very persuasive, clearly. It's just because there's so many asks. Yes, agreed.
Okay, one last question is, you said something, I'm sorry, you said something about Lombard and City Springs schools, they're gonna be demolished? Are you doing the renovations and things like that? Will it be rebuilt? Will the schools be rebuilt?
So City Springs is not being demolished anytime soon. Lombard Elementary Middle is being demolished. City Springs, and it is being demolished in order to build a brand-new City Springs. City Springs will then move to Lombard Middle, and then City Springs' existing building will be demolished.
What's the timeline for those?
So City Schools still hasn't completed any of the design. They have like a conceptual drawing for the new school. Demolition, the environmental notice to proceed to get the initial environmental information was just issued this week. Demolition won't start probably until August on that building at the earliest. And that demolition is so big, it could take 5 to 6 months to complete the demolition. City Schools is responsible for building the new school, and so then they will construct the new school in a timeline, but they're not going to be ready to start building because they still have to finish, they still have to fully design the school, put it out for bid, all that stuff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the community, City Springs is extremely involved in that planning process, Principal Burketta and everybody.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.